Welcome to another installment of Mazars 3-Minute Spotlight, where we have express interviews with industry experts. I'm Vian Olivier, and today I'm joined by Yolandi, who is our PIE and listed specialist. Yolandi, thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, Vian.
Yolandi, I think let's kick it off. So from your point of view, what is the rationale for a owner-managed business to list their shares on a public stock exchange and become essentially a PIE or listed engagement and have those onerous laws and regulations apply to them?
I think it's a combination of things, Vian. Most companies list because they want access to capital, and it's much easier to raise capital in a market if you are in a position to actively engage the market and raise the capital that way. But you can also be in a sector where you need to be more publicly out there in terms of what the business is doing, like the financial services sector, for instance, who wouldn't necessarily only list to raise capital, but also to build up a knowledge base and a reputation with their clients.
Let's talk about SPACs. SPACs is not something that's common in South Africa. You see it more in other jurisdictions such as the US. Can you perhaps maybe just explain to the listeners exactly what a SPAC is and what the rationale is for following a SPAC approach?
Certainly. So firstly, if we can just unpack that acronym, it's a special purpose acquisition company. So the big difference between a SPAC and a normal IPO or going out and listing your shares is that an IPO, the listing happens without any trading in the company. So the founders will gather support and list the entity, which will then has as its sole purpose to acquire a trading company. So in some instances, it could be easier and certainly quicker to list an entity by way of a SPAC, but there are also some downfalls, like often it's more expensive to do that. In South Africa, it's not widely used, but in Europe, you see them used quite a lot.
Thanks so much. And a hot topic at the moment, of course, is mandatory audit firm rotations and the High Court's decision not to make it mandatory for these listed entities to essentially rotate their auditors. What is the rationale for having mandatory audit firm rotation, and how it will be incorporated going forward to make sure that we in South Africa align with the global market?
I think there's no doubt that we will align with the global market. We have to remember why mandatory firm rotation came into place, and that is to improve independence of auditors and thereby improve audit quality. There's no doubt in my mind that legislation will catch up and the right processes will put in place to make it mandatory in South Africa. And I think that is fully expected by the market, which you can see by companies changing auditors, even though the mandatory audit firm rotation rule has fallen away effectively in the country.
Yolandi, and I mean, from a perspective of servicing these PIE and listed entities, there are certain challenges involved in terms of, let's say, onerous volumes of transactions, laws and regulations. How do we overcome this from a Mazars perspective to be able to service these clients in this unique industry and also perform that services represented by the Mazars brand?
The biggest challenge with taking on a new PIE is getting to grips with the business. The regulations are one thing and they're fairly similar. It doesn't matter what business you're in or what sector you're in, but getting to grips with how things work at a client, where the pitfalls are, what their strengths are, where there may be a lack of controls or controls not properly implemented, that is what an auditor needs to get to grips with very quickly, because your first 2 to 3 years is your highest risk of audit failure. So from a Mazars perspective, it really is to build that working relationship with the client and get to grips in detail with how the business works.
Yolandi, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vian.